I'll take you back to one of our top stories, which is about the U.S. National Security Strategy 2025, which was brought out on Friday, which spelled out the foreign policy stance, the kind of strategy that the U.S. is adopting under Trump 2.0 presidency. It has very relevant portions for India, but relevant portions also for other major nations such as China and Russia, and even for Europe. We're joined to talk about it by Meera Shankar, India's former ambassador to the US. Good evening to you, Meera Shankar. What do you make of this policy, especially in terms of how it sort of sees the evolving relationship between America and India, and how India has reacted to it today?
Well, I think that this new national security strategy that the Trump administration has unveiled is a pared back strategy compared to previous strategies. And it basically asserts that the US no longer seeks unilateral global dominance. It focuses US priority on homeland security and securing the borders of the United States and securing the Western Hemisphere, which means the Americas, to prevent illegal immigration, narcotic smuggling, crimes, and other threats which the US sees to its borders. So it prioritizes that as the most important US security objective, national security objective. It then talks about the Indo-Pacific, and it says this region is the fastest growing. It has it accounts for almost 50% of global GDP in PPP terms, purchasing power parity terms, and 25 to 30% in nominal terms. So this is going to be an area of economic growth in future, and also therefore an area of geopolitical contestation. It dwells at length on the relationship with China, and the tone is different from the last national security strategy under Biden, which had talked of China as the one country which has both the intention and increasingly the capacity to challenge the United States. It had talked of, out-competing China in a responsible way without seeking or without triggering inadvertent conflict. But the Trump administration basically talks of China not as a security threat so much, but as an economic competitor which has used unfair means to grow. And it talks of actually negotiating a rebalancing of trade and economic ties with China. It does talk of doing away with predatory trade practices, intellectual property theft, subsidies, industrial policies, but it does not name China specifically in that context. It's a general kind of approach, though it is fairly clear that they're meaning China. But I think what would be interesting for China is that on Taiwan, it basically says that the US will oppose any unilateral action to, take over Taiwan. And also that it will seek to deter this by a military overmatch, as they call it, which means having sufficient military force to deter China from any military adventure in Taiwan. It does not reiterate that the US supports the one China policy. So in a sense, it's a tougher line on Taiwan, but it also talks about burden sharing with allies and partners so that they take on a greater responsibility for defense in the Indo-Pacific region. It highlights that the importance of Taiwan is not just because it manufactures most of the world's semiconductors, but also because it divides Asia and the Indo-Pacific really into Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. And therefore, it's very important to preserving the sea lanes of communication open, particularly in the South China Sea. It also talks about preventing, while the US will not seek dominance, they will also seek to deter dominance by any other country in the Indo-Pacific. And they talk of strengthening the economic relationship and other aspects with India in this process. They also talk about India as a partner in ensuring, alternative or de-risking supply chains, particularly in areas such as critical minerals, and also working together in Africa.
Yes.
So India is mentioned in the context of the Indo-Pacific, and the US emphasizes the need to strengthen commercial, economic, and other aspects of the relationship with India. With regard to Europe, there is a remarkable shift in the way in which the US portrays Russia in the national security strategy. The Biden administration strategy had talked of Russia as an imminent or immediate threat, a security threat, and one that the US would seek to contain. And this national security strategy, on the other hand, talks about reintegrating Russia, but stabilizing the situation within Europe and also re-establishing strategic stability with Russia. I think that point comes across many times. It emphasizes that the importance of ending the Ukraine conflict is not only to help Europe overcome the weaknesses that it is facing today, including in terms of a depressed economy, but also to prevent expansion of the war inadvertently or even advertently, and to restore strategic stability with Russia. It talks of the possibility that Europe faces what it calls civilizational erasure, and that, this is because
That's a reference
of
to
Europe's
migration as well.
policies. Yeah, and I think it talks of the lack of democracy and Europeans, subverting democracy. I think more in the context of the fact that the right-wing populist movements, which are basically anti-immigrant, have, been, in a sense, sought to be kept out of the legitimate European political framework. And of course, he says that this is why also that the voices of so many people in Europe who actually want peace in Ukraine are not being heard. They are being suppressed. And he also says that peace is essential so that they can rebuild Ukraine and that it can survive as a viable state. So, very strong message there. to the Europeans, which I'm sure they won't be very happy with. And it also talks about, how Europe's energies and innovative capacities are curbed by their excessive regulatory framework, including through institutions such as the EU. So, all in all, not a very happy message for Europeans. And I think they have rejected US interference, in a sense,
Yes.
in their political affairs.
Mhm. And
And
those who expected that the US might also spell out, because these were part of previous similar documents, its stance on, say for that matter, I mean, security is terrorism is a major threat to security of all kinds, non-state actors and everything, and even the issues of climate change not mentioned at all.
yes, well, that's on par with the Trump administration's denial of the whole issue of climate change. On the other hand, it talks about how the US will resume, energy production and become a major, which will become a major force for for US prosperity. And
It
it
talks about
talks about
reindustrialization.
actually, yeah, it talks about also about cutting back or pulling back from the Middle East because it has, unnecessarily dominated US strategy or security strategy in the past because of energy dependence. Now the US is no longer dependent on the Middle East for energy, and also many of the crises that were there are perhaps moderating. So the US believes that in the medium to long term, it will thin down its deployments and shift greater attention to the Indo-Pacific. It
Yes.
also talks about peace through strength. So, building up the military, where it wants to spend $1 trillion on shoring up its military strength, particularly in the areas of nuclear, space, and undersea and automatic systems. So, it's not that the US is going to actually cut back on its defense. It plans actually to increase military spending by a very significant amount, even though, where the budget is going to come from still remains a question.
Tariffs.
But quite clearly, the US seeks to rebuild its economic dominance into the future.
Well, easier said than done. And we saw how Mr. Jaiswal, our External Affairs Ministry spokesperson, reacted to a very narrow part of really this entire strategic document. But if you look at the overall perspective, how should India proceed in its dealing with the US with this sort of a stated doctrine now there for the next, I mean, till Donald Trump's term lasts, and maybe it might have an impact which lasts beyond his term as well.
Look, we really don't know because it talks of not pressurizing, other countries, but actually, in point of fact, the Trump administration has been pressurizing countries on trade through sanctions, not to purchase oil from Russia, for instance, as far as India is concerned, or very high reciprocal sanctions, or it suddenly lays claim to Greenland, or it suddenly lays claim to Canada as an additional state of the United States. So it's a mix. One thing is for sure that they don't want to cut back on their military. They want to spend more on the military. They want to push partners into greater burden sharing, spending more on defense and taking over more responsibility. In this context, they mention NATO's decision to spend 5% of GDP on defense. and basically urge allies in the Indo-Pacific, Japan, South Korea, Australia, to spend more on defense. For India, they talk about India contributing more, and also through organizations such as the Quad.
Right.
And so clearly the emphasis for the US is going to be homeland security, cutting back on immigration, is re-establishing dominance in the Americas, uh, perhaps cutting back from the Middle East, and looking at greater burden sharing with allies in the Indo-Pacific, even as it continues to upgrade its military equipment and military preparedness.
Okay, well, we have to wait and see how India sees this. Does it see as a challenge or as an opportunity? Time will tell. Thank you so much for joining us, Meera Shankar, to
Welcome.
talk about it.